The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Willa Parker struggled against the coarse ropes binding her wrists, the thundering hoofbeats of her captors' horses drowning out her screams as they rode farther from everything she'd ever known. 3 days earlier, she had been tending her father's general store in Delta, Colorado. Now she was merchandise in the hands of the most notorious rustlers west of the Mississippi. The spring of 1879 had started with such promise for 20-year-old Willa. Her father's business was thriving in their growing settlement nestled in the shadow of the Grand Mesa. The railroad had finally connected their remote town to Denver, bringing new opportunities and settlers to Delta. Willa had dreams of attending a proper ladies' college back east, dreams that now seemed as distant as the shrinking silhouette of the town behind her. "Keep quiet, girl," growled Silas Blackburn, the leader of the rustlers who had raided their town, stealing cattle, horses, and Willa herself. His weathered face was partially hidden beneath a thick beard, but his cold eyes revealed a man who had left his humanity somewhere in the vast wilderness years ago. "You'll fetch a fine price where we're heading." Willa felt sick at his words but refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "My father will pay whatever you ask. You don't need to take me any farther." A cruel laugh erupted from Blackburn. "Your father ain't got what we need, girl. But there are men in the territories who'll pay handsomely for a pretty face like yours." He spurred his horse ahead, leaving Willa with the youngest of the rustlers, a boy barely older than herself who couldn't meet her eyes. As the gang made camp that night, Willa overheard snippets of their plans. They were heading toward New Mexico territory, where they had connections with men who traded in stolen goods and, occasionally, people. Her heart sank with each mile that took her farther from Delta, farther from any hope of rescue. What Willa didn't know was that her disappearance had already set another journey in motion, one that would change her life forever. Finn Donovan had been trailing a herd of cattle from his small ranch outside Delta when he saw the smoke rising from town. At 30, he'd seen his share of violence on the frontier, but nothing prepared him for the sight of Mr. Parker's general store with its broken windows and the old man himself lying wounded behind the counter. "They took her," Parker gasped, clutching Finn's arm with surprising strength for a man who'd taken a bullet to his shoulder. "The rustlers took my Willa." Finn had known Willa since she was a girl with pigtails, helping her father stack cans on shelves too tall for her reach. Over the years, he'd watched her grow into a spirited young woman whose quick wit and gentle smile had begun to occupy his thoughts more than he cared to admit. They weren't strangers, but they weren't exactly close either, just familiar faces in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. "How many were there?" Finn asked as the town doctor tended to Parker's wound. "6, maybe 7, Parker winced. "Led by a man with a scar across his neck. They call him Blackburn." Finn's jaw tightened. Silas Blackburn was notorious throughout Colorado and beyond, a former Confederate soldier turned outlaw who'd built a reputation for ruthlessness. If he had Willa, there wasn't a moment to lose. "Sheriff's gathering a posse," the doctor informed them, "but they'll be at least a day getting organized." "Willa doesn't have a day," Finn replied, already calculating what he would need. He wasn't a lawman, just a rancher who knew the land and could read tracks better than most. But in that moment, looking at the despair in old Parker's eyes, Finn made a decision that would alter the course of his life. "I'll find her, Mr. Parker," he promised, the words tumbling out before he could consider their weight. "I'll bring her home." Within an hour, Finn had returned to his ranch, packed supplies and saddled his best horse, a sure-footed buckskin gelding named Chance. His foreman, Hector, tried to convince him to wait for the sheriff's posse. You're talking about tracking Blackburn's gang alone. That's suicide, Finn. They've got at least half a day's head start, Finn replied, checking his Winchester repeating rifle before sliding it into its scabbard. Every hour matters. Hector sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of his boss's jaw. At least take Ghost with you. He whistled, and a large gray and white dog with intelligent eyes trotted over. The half-wolf shepherd mix had been Finn's loyal companion for years, and there was no better tracker on 4 legs in all of Colorado. With Ghost loping alongside, Finn rode out as the last light faded from the sky. The trail wasn't hard to follow initially. 7 riders pushing hard toward the south left clear signs in the spring mud. But Finn knew Blackburn was too smart to leave an obvious trail for long. The Rustlers had taken a punishing pace, driving their horses hard through the night. Finn alternated between tracking and riding, letting Ghost range ahead when the trail grew faint. By dawn of the second day, he'd covered nearly 50 miles but knew he was still far behind. Meanwhile, Willa was discovering the depths of her own resilience. After the initial shock and terror, her mind had cleared enough to begin watching for opportunities. The gang wasn't as cohesive as they first appeared. Blackburn ruled by fear, and at least 2 of the men seemed uneasy with having kidnapped a woman. "This ain't right, Silas," she overheard one man say during their brief stop to water the horses. "Stealing cattle is one thing, but taking the girl—" "You want your share or not, Martinez," Blackburn had replied, his hand resting meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "Because I can arrange for you to have neither." The conversation had ended there, but Willa filed the information away. Dissension in the ranks might be her only advantage. They pushed deeper into the wilderness, following old hunting trails and dry creek beds. Willa's hands were kept bound during the day, though they'd begun untying her at night so she could eat. Her once neat dress was now torn and dirty, her hair falling loose from its pins. But her spirit remained unbroken. On the 3rd night, they camped in a narrow canyon, the walls providing natural shelter from the wind that had begun to howl across the plateau. Willa sat apart from the men, watching them pass a bottle around the campfire. The youngest rustler, who she'd learned was called Tommy, brought her a plate of beans and salt pork. "Shouldn't be much longer," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Blackburn wasn't watching. "We'll reach Hernandez's place tomorrow or the next day." "Who's Hernandez?" Willa asked, seizing the opportunity for information. Tommy looked uncomfortable. "Just a man Blackburn does business with. Don't ask me more than that, miss." But his eyes told her everything she needed to know wherever they were taking her. Tommy at least had the decency to be ashamed of it. That night, as the men slept off their whiskey, Willa worked at the loose knot binding her wrists to a scrubby pine tree. Hours of patient effort finally yielded results, and she slipped free just as the moon reached its zenith. Moving with a caution born of desperation, she crept between the sleeping forms toward the horses. She had nearly reached them when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. "Not so fast, girl." Blackburn's whiskey-soaked breath burned her ear as he dragged her back toward the camp. "Seems you need a firmer hand to keep you in line." The next morning, Willa rode with her hands bound to the saddle horn, a bruise darkening her cheek where Blackburn had struck her. But even this couldn't extinguish the determination in her eyes. She'd try again, and again. As many times as it took. Finn, meanwhile, had lost the trail twice where the rustlers crossed rocky ground and dry stream beds. Each time, Ghost had helped him recover it, but precious hours were lost. He pushed himself and chanced to their limits, sleeping only in brief snatches and eating from his saddlebags without stopping. On the 4th day, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains. unleashing torrents of rain that threatened to wash away what little sign remained of the Rustlers' passage. Finn took shelter in an abandoned line shack, frustration gnawing at him as he watched the rain obliterate tracks he'd been following for days. "We'll find her, boy," he told Ghost, who lay at his feet, head on paws but ears alert. The dog's eyes seemed to hold a promise, and Finn drew strength from his companion's unwavering loyalty. When the rain subsided to a drizzle, Finn discovered fresh horse droppings near the shack, evidence that the Rustlers had passed this way not long before the storm hit. His spirits lifted. They were on the right track, and the gap was closing. The landscape had changed as they'd traveled south, the familiar Colorado mountains giving way to high desert plateaus and Riedrock canyons. They were entering Ute territory now, lands contested by both native tribes and settlers pushing ever westward. Finn treaded carefully, respecting boundaries where he could, but never losing sight of his purpose. That evening, Ghost picked up a scent and led Finn to a recent campsite. The ashes were still warm, and there were clear signs that a larger party had rested here, including smaller bootprints that could only belong to Willa. His heart quickened. They couldn't be more than half a day ahead now. As night fell, Finn spotted a faint glow in the distance, a campfire. Moving with the stealth he'd learned from years of hunting, he approached close enough to make out figures around the flames. Through his field glasses, he counted 6 men and Willa, her hands bound, her face showing a dark bruise but her posture still proud. The sight of her injury made his blood boil, but Finn forced himself to stay calm and think strategically. 6 against 1 were poor odds, especially with Willa at risk. He would need to be smart about this. Retreating to a safe distance, Finn made his own cold camp and plotted his next move. A direct attack would likely get both him and Willa killed. But if he could separate them, pick them off one by one. Before dawn, Finn was in position, having circled wide to place himself on the path ahead. As the Rustlers broke camp and continued their journey, he watched through the field glasses, noting their formation. Willa rode in the middle of the group, flanked by Blackburn himself, and a younger man who seemed to stay close to her. Finn's plan was risky, but it was the best chance he had. Moving ahead of them, he selected a spot where the trail narrowed between 2 rock formations, creating a natural bottleneck. Here, he would make his first move. Willa had lost track of the days, each one blending into the next in an endless rhythm of riding and brief camps. Her body ached from hours in the saddle, and the constant fear had left her exhausted. Yet still she watched and waited, counting her captors each morning, noting their routines and weaknesses. They were following a narrow trail between towering rock formations when a single shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. The man riding point clutched his shoulder and toppled from his horse with a cry of pain. "Ambush!" shouted Blackburn, drawing his pistol and scanning the ridgeline. "Take cover!" The Rustlers scattered, dragging Willa from her horse and using the animals as shields. Blackburn kept a firm grip on her arm, his eyes wild as they darted from one possible hiding place to another. "Show yourself!" he bellowed into the silence that followed the single shot. Another crack of rifle fire answered him, and a second Rustler fell, clutching his leg. The precision of the shots was unnerving. Their attacker could have killed both men but had chosen to wound them instead. "It's one man," said Martinez, who had pressed himself against the rock wall. "Has to be." "A posse would have rushed us by now." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "1 man or 20, he's dead if he thinks he can take what's mine." He turned to Tommy and 2 others. "Circle around, find him, and kill him." As the men moved out, Willa felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Someone had found them, someone skilled enough to track them through wilderness and brave enough to face 7 armed men alone. Could it be the sheriff, a bounty hunter? Or perhaps, she didn't dare complete the thought, afraid to kindle hope that might be extinguished all too quickly. Finn watched through his rifle sight as the rustlers split up. His strategy was working divide and conquer. Ghost lay silent beside him, trained to stay absolutely still during a hunt. As 3 men began to circle toward his position, Finn retreated, planning to lead them on a chase while doubling back toward Willa. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rock formations. Finn laid false trails, doubled back, and used every trick he'd learned from years of tracking game. One by one, he managed to separate the men, disarming them with precision shots, or in one case, the butt of his rifle to the back of a rustler's head when the man passed too close to his hiding place. By midday, 3 of Blackburn's men were incapacitated, their weapons confiscated, their hands bound with their own belts and left in various locations throughout the maze of rocks. But Finn had also revealed his position more than once, and the remaining rustlers were growing warier. As he crept back toward the site where Blackburn held Willa, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering rock inches from his head. Finn dropped flat, scanning for the shooter. Through a gap in the rocks he spotted Tommy, the young rustler, his revolver shaking visibly even at this distance. "I know you're there," Tommy called, his voice cracking. "Blackburn says to tell you he'll kill the girl if you don't throw out your weapons and show yourself." Finn's mind raced. He couldn't risk Willa's life, but surrendering would mean death for both of them. He needed another approach. "Your friends are alive," Finn called back, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I could have killed them, but I didn't. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." "Blackburn won't let her go," Tommy replied, sounding torn. "He's already promised her to Hernandez." "And what do you think Hernandez plans to do with her?" Finn pressed, sensing weakness in the young man's resolve. "Is that something you want on your conscience, Tommy? Because you seem like a decent man caught up with the wrong crowd." There was a long pause before Tommy responded. "How do you know my name?" "I've been tracking you for days," Finn said. "I know a lot of things. I know you're not like the others. I know you've tried to be kind to Miss Parker when you could." Another silence stretched between them, then almost too quiet to hear. "What do you want me to do?" Finn took a calculated risk. "Tell me where they are and then ride out. Go home, Tommy. Start over somewhere else before you have a price on your head like Blackburn." For a moment, Finn thought he'd misjudged the young man. Then Tommy lowered his gun and pointed toward a cluster of rocks about 100 yards distant. "There's 3 left: Blackburn, Martinez, and Reynolds. They're in that overhang, using the girl as a shield." Tommy holstered his revolver. "I never wanted this. Just wanted to make some money, see some country." "It's not too late to choose differently," Finn said, rising slowly from his position, rifle still ready but not aimed at Tommy. "Ride east for 2 days. You'll hit a town called Montrose. Tell them Finn Donovan sent you. Ask for work at the livery." Tommy nodded once, relief washing over his young face, then turned and walked toward where the horses were tethered. Finn let him go, already focusing on his next move. With only 3 rustlers remaining, the odds had improved, but Willa was still in grave danger. Finn circled carefully, Ghost padding silently at his heels, until he could observe the overhang Tommy had indicated. Sure enough, there was Blackburn, his scarred face twisted in anger as he kept Willa close, using her as a human shield. Martinez paced nearby, while Reynolds kept watch from a higher position on the rocks. Finn considered his options. Reynolds was the immediate threat. His elevated position gave him too good a vantage point. Taking a deep breath, Finn lined up his shot and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and Reynolds tumbled from his perch with a cry, his rifle clattering down the rock face. Instantly, Martinez began firing blindly in Finn's direction, forcing him to duck for cover. The exchange of gunfire continued for several tense minutes, neither man able to get a clear shot at the other. Then, in a moment that would replay in Finn's nightmares for years to come, Blackburn emerged from cover, dragging Willa in front of him with a knife at her throat. "Enough!" the outlaw shouted. "Show yourself or I open her throat right here." Finn froze, his finger on the trigger, knowing he had no shot that wouldn't risk Willa's life. But Willa Parker had not survived a week of captivity to become a passive victim now. As Blackburn's attention focused on searching for Finn, she drove her elbow hard into his ribs, just as her father had taught her years ago, when troublemakers occasionally came into the store. The sudden attack caught Blackburn by surprise. His grip loosened just enough for Willa to twist away, though the knife sliced a shallow cut across her collarbone as she moved. She stumbled forward, and in that instant, Finn had his shot. The rifle cracked, and Blackburn staggered backward, clutching his chest. But even mortally wounded, the outlaw managed one final act of malice, raising his pistol toward Willa's back. Martinez, seeing the tide turn, made a desperate dash for the horses. Ghost, who had been circling wide on Finn's command, launched himself at the fleeing rustler, taking him down in a flurry of snarls and flashing teeth. Finn fired again, his bullet finding Blackburn's heart a split second before the outlaw could pull his trigger. The gang leader collapsed, his final expression one of shocked disbelief that someone had outplayed him at last. For a moment, the canyon was eerily silent, the echo of gunshots fading into the vast wilderness. Then Willa turned toward where Finn stood, her eyes searching the rocks until they found him. "Finn Donovan," she called, her voice hoarse but steady. "Is that really you?" Finn emerged from cover, rifle still at the ready as he scanned for any remaining threats. Ghost returned to his side, muzzle darkened with blood but tail wagging at a job well done. "It's me, Miss Parker," he confirmed, approaching cautiously. "Your father sent me to find you." When he reached her, Finn was struck by the transformation in the woman he'd known from town. The pretty shopkeeper's daughter was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, a survivor. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face bruised, a fresh cut bleeding at her collarbone, but her eyes burned with a fierce light he'd never seen before. "My father, is he alive?" The question came out in a rush, as though she'd been holding it back for days. "Yes," Finn assured her, setting down his rifle to search his saddlebag for bandages. "Took a bullet to the shoulder defending you, but the doctor said he'd recover." Relief flooded Willa's face, and for the first time since her ordeal began, tears welled in her eyes. She swayed slightly, a week of tension and terror finally catching up with her now that safety was within reach. Finn moved forward instinctively, catching her before she could fall. She felt small in his arms, but not fragile, never that. "I've got you," he murmured, guiding her to sit on a nearby rock. "You're safe now." As he tended to the cut on her collarbone, Finn explained how he'd tracked them from Delta, following their trail across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Willa listened in silence, her eyes never leaving his face, as though trying to reconcile the quiet rancher she'd known with the man who had single-handedly defeated Blackburn's entire gang. "Why did you come alone?" she finally asked. "Why not wait for the sheriff's posse?" Finn's hand stilled for a moment as he considered her question. "There wasn't time," he said simply. Then, more softly, "and I couldn't bear the thought of what might happen to you if we waited." Something shifted in Willa's expression, then a recognition, perhaps, or a question forming. But before she could speak, Ghost gave a low growl, alerting them to movement nearby. It was only Martinez, trying to crawl toward a dropped pistol despite the injuries Ghost had inflicted. Finn secured him quickly, adding him to the collection of surviving rustlers who would face justice when they returned to civilization. With the immediate danger past, Finn and Willa gathered the rustlers' horses and supplies. They found Willa's belongings among the stolen goods, a small carpet bag with a few personal items that brought a tremulous smile to her face when Finn handed it to her. "We should camp here tonight," Finn suggested as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Start fresh in the morning." "It's a long ride back to Delta." Willa nodded, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. As Finn prepared a simple camp and tended to the horses, she sat watching him, wrapped in a blanket he'd given her despite the mild evening air. "How did you find us?" she asked as he built a small fire. "Blackburn was so careful about covering our tracks." Finn glanced up, a hint of pride in his smile. "He was good, but I was better. My father was a scout for the army before he settled in Colorado, taught me everything he knew about tracking." He nodded toward Ghost, who lay nearby, alert but relaxed. "And I had help. Ghost here can follow a scent for days." As if recognizing his name, the dog's ears perked up. Willa extended a hand, and after a curious sniff, Ghost moved closer to accept her tentative scratches behind his ears. "Thank you both then," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would come." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity but as a matter of fact, struck Finn harder than he expected. The idea that she had believed herself abandoned was unbearable. "Your father would have come himself if he could," Finn assured her. "Half the town wanted to join the posse. You're valued in Delta, Miss Parker." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Willa," she corrected him. "After all this, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." "Willa," he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue in a way that surprised him. They ate a simple meal of beans and jerky, neither having much appetite but recognizing the need for sustenance. As darkness fell, Finn insisted Willa take the only bedroll while he kept watch. "You need rest more than I do," he told her when she protested. "I've slept rough plenty of times." Too exhausted to argue further, Willa settled into the bedroll, Ghost curling up protectively beside her as if he'd appointed himself her guardian. Finn sat with his back against a rock, rifle across his knees, keeping watch over the woman he'd crossed wilderness to find. In the flickering firelight, he studied her face in repose, noting how even in sleep a certain tension remained in her features. He wondered what nightmares might haunt her dreams and found himself wishing he could shield her from them as he had from Blackburn. The realization startled him. This protective instinct went beyond the duty he'd undertaken when he promised old Parker he'd bring his daughter home. Somewhere during those long days of tracking, during the careful planning and desperate fighting, Willa Parker had become more to him than just his neighbor's daughter or a damsel to rescue. Finn had always kept to himself, content with his small ranch and his solitary ways. Women in town had shown interest over the years, but none had ever made him consider changing the comfortable rhythm of his life. Yet watching Willa sleep, her courage and resilience still evident even in exhaustion, he felt something shift inside him, a possibility he'd never seriously contemplated before. Dawn broke with the promise of fair weather for their journey home. Willa woke to find Finn already preparing coffee over a small fire, Ghost nowhere to be seen. "He's checking the perimeter," Finn explained when she asked after the dog. "Old habit. He'll be back soon." Sure enough, the gray and white shepherd trotted into camp minutes later, accepting a piece of jerky from Finn before settling down to enjoy his reward. "How far are we from Delta?" Willa asked, wincing as she stretched muscles stiffened by days in the saddle and nights sleeping on hard ground. "About 5 days' ride," Finn answered, handing her a tin cup of strong coffee. "We're deep in the southeastern part of Colorado now, almost to New Mexico territory. Blackburn was taking you to a ranch just over the border." Willa's hands tightened around the cup. "To this Hernandez person Tommy mentioned," Finn nodded grimly. "Manuel Hernandez. He deals in stolen cattle and horses, among other things. He's been known to have connections with certain establishments in Santa Fe that—" He trailed off, unwilling to speak the words. "That buy women," Willa finished for him, her voice steady despite the horror of what she'd narrowly escaped. "I suspected as much from things they said." Her matter-of-fact tone both impressed and concerned Finn. "Willa, what happened to you, what almost happened, it's not something you need to face alone. When we get back to Delta," she interrupted, a new determination in her eyes. "I'm going to help my father heal, rebuild our store, and then I'm going to learn to shoot. Properly, I mean. No one will ever make me feel that helpless again." Finn studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I could teach you if you'd like. I'm a fair shot, as you've seen." The offer hung between them, loaded with meanings neither was ready to acknowledge. Willa sipped her coffee, then met his gaze directly. "I'd like that very much." They broke camp efficiently, securing the surviving rustlers on horses with their hands bound to the saddle horns, an ironic echo of how Willa herself had been transported. The bodies of Blackburn and the other rustler who hadn't survived were wrapped in blankets and draped over horses as well. Justice and proper burial would await their return to civilization. The journey back was arduous, but far less frantic than Finn's pursuit had been. They traveled at a pace Willa could comfortably manage, making camp each evening before full dark. As the days passed, Finn noticed the color returning to Willa's cheeks and the shadows gradually receding from her eyes. They talked more freely now, filling the long hours in the saddle with conversation that ranged from childhood memories of Delta to dreams of what the future might hold. Finn found himself sharing thoughts he'd rarely voiced aloud, his hopes of expanding his ranch, breeding horses as well as cattle, perhaps building a proper house someplace with a view of the mountains. "It sounds wonderful," Willa said after he described the plot of land he'd been saving to purchase. "Peaceful." "It can be lonely," he admitted, surprising himself with his candor, "especially in winter when the snow makes it hard to get into town for weeks at a time." Willa was silent for a moment, her eyes on the horizon. "I used to think I wanted to go east, see Boston or New York, study at a women's college, but after this," she gestured vaguely at the vastness around them, "I find I don't want to leave Colorado after all. There's something honest about this land, even in its dangers." Finn understood exactly what she meant. The frontier was unforgiving, but it was also real in a way that civilized society often wasn't. Out here, a person was judged by their actions, their word, their ability to endure, not by their family name or the cut of their clothes. On the third night of their journey home, they camped beside a clear stream that cut through a small meadow ringed by aspens. The prisoners were secured for the night, and Ghost had appointed himself their guard, allowing Finn to relax his vigilance slightly. After they'd eaten, Willa disappeared briefly downstream, returning with her hair damp and her face scrubbed clean. She'd changed into the spare dress from her carpet bag, a simple blue calico that had somehow survived the journey relatively intact. "First chance I've had to feel human again," she explained with a small smile that transformed her face. Finn found himself staring before he caught himself and busied his hands with cleaning his rifle. "The stream's good for that," he agreed awkwardly. Willa settled beside him on the fallen log he'd dragged near the fire. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the gentle chorus of spring peepers from the stream. "Finn," she said finally, her voice soft in the gathering darkness, "I never properly thanked you for what you did. Coming after me alone, risking your life against such odds. I don't know how I can ever repay such a debt." Finn set aside his rifle and turned to face her, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her earnest gaze. "There's no debt," he said. "I'd have done the same for anyone from Delta." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. Yes, he would have helped if any neighbor had been in trouble, but the single-minded determination that had driven him across wilderness, the cold fury that had steadied his hand, when he finally faced Blackburn, those had been for Willa alone. Something in his expression must have communicated this unspoken truth, because Willa's eyes widened slightly, and a flush that had nothing to do with the fire's warmth spread across her cheeks. "Even so," she persisted, "I want you to know that I'm grateful. Not just for the rescue, but for how you've treated me since. Some men would see me as damaged now." "Anyone who would think that doesn't deserve your concern," Finn replied, an edge of anger sharpening his normally gentle tone. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. "You survived, Willa. That makes you stronger, not damaged." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, something unreadable in her expression. "My father always spoke highly of you, said you were a man of integrity, even if you kept to yourself too much." Finn gave a short laugh. Old Parker's never been one to mince words. "No," Willa agreed with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since her rescue, "but he's usually right." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither had anticipated when they'd begun this journey. Then Ghost gave a low growl from where he watched the prisoners, breaking the spell. Finn reluctantly released her hand and stood. "I should check on our guests," he said. "Try to get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow." Willa nodded, but her eyes followed him as he moved away from the fire, and Finn felt their weight like a physical touch against his back. The following days established a rhythm to their travel, riding from dawn until late afternoon, making camp, tending to necessities, and sharing quiet conversations by the fire. Each evening, Finn found himself looking forward to these talks more than he cared to admit, each revelation about Willa adding another layer to his growing admiration. She told him about her mother, who had died when Willa was 12, leaving her to help her father run the store. How she taught herself bookkeeping from a manual ordered from Denver, saving the business from the financial troubles that had plagued it after her mother's death. How she still read voraciously whenever new books came to town, dreaming of worlds beyond Delta while building a life within it. In turn, Finn shared parts of himself he'd rarely revealed to anyone: his childhood in a mining camp where his father had worked as a guide, his mother's death from fever when he was just 8, his years working cattle drives and saving every penny to buy his small ranch. He even told her about his younger brother, lost in a river crossing gone wrong when they were teenagers, a tragedy that had shaped his cautious, solitary nature. "Is that why you never married?" Willa asked on their last night before reaching Delta, her question direct but her tone gentle. "Because you're afraid of losing someone again." Finn stared into the fire, considering her insight. "Maybe," he admitted. "I never thought about it that way. Just seemed easier to focus on building something stable first." "And now," she prompted, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Now I'm not so sure that was the right choice," he answered honestly. "Some things are worth the risk." The following day, they crested the final ridge and saw Delta spread out below them. The small collection of buildings nestled along the river looking impossibly civilized after their time in the wilderness. Willa straightened in her saddle, emotion washing over her face at the sight of home she'd feared she might never see again. "We made it," she whispered. "You made it," Finn corrected her. "You never gave up." Their arrival caused a commotion, with townsfolk rushing from homes and businesses as word spread. The sheriff and his deputies took charge of the prisoners, expressing amazed admiration at Finn's accomplishment. But Finn barely registered their praise, his attention focused on the reunion unfolding in front of the general store. Willa Parker, his arm still in a sling, had rushed outside at the first shouts. When he saw his daughter dismounting from her horse, the gruff old shopkeeper broke down in tears, embracing Willa with his good arm as though he might never let her go. Finn hung back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on their private moment. But then Willa turned, her eyes searching until they found him in the crowd. With her father's arm still around her shoulders, she beckoned Finn forward. "Pa," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is the man who saved my life." Finn Donovan tracked Blackburn's gang for almost 2 weeks to bring me home. Old Parker extended his hand, grasping Finn's with surprising strength. "There's nothing I can say or do that would ever repay what you've done, son," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But whatever I have is yours for the asking." Finn shook his head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Seeing Willa home safe is all the payment I need, sir." His eyes met Willa's over her father's shoulder, and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, a beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The surviving Rustlers were transported to the county seat for trial. Statements were given to the authorities, and Delta gradually returned to its normal rhythms, though forever changed by the events that had transpired. Finn found reasons to visit town more frequently than his ranch business strictly required, often stopping by the general store to check on the Parkers' recovery. William was healing well, though he tired easily and relied heavily on Willa to manage the store's day-to-day operations. 2 weeks after their return, Finn entered the store to find Willa alone behind the counter, tallying figures in a ledger. She looked up at the sound of the bell, her face brightening in a way that made his heart skip. "Finn, I was hoping you'd come by today. Thought I'd see if you needed anything from my place," he said, the excuse sounding thin even to his own ears. "I've got some extra eggs, and Hector's wife made too much apple butter again." Willa's smile widened. "That's very thoughtful. Pa's particularly fond of apple butter." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with all the things they'd shared during their journey but hadn't spoken of since returning to the confines of town life and its proprieties. "Actually," Finn said finally, gathering his courage, "I wondered if you'd like to go for a ride on Sunday. Weather's supposed to be fair, and there's a spot up by the mesa with a view I think you might appreciate." Willa's expression softened. "I'd like that very much. Pa's been insisting I take some time for myself anyway." "Good," Finn nodded, unreasonably pleased. "I'll come by after church then." As he turned to leave, Willa called after him. "Finn, don't forget you promised to teach me to shoot." He looked back, noting the determination in her eyes. "I haven't forgotten. We can start Sunday if you'd like." Her answering smile carried a hint of the strength he'd witnessed during their ordeal, a reminder that the woman he was coming to care for deeply was no delicate flower, but a survivor who had faced darkness and emerged unbroken. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect for their outing. Finn arrived at the Parker home after church services to find Willa waiting, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair simply braided rather than arranged in the elaborate style she usually wore in town. "You look—" Finn paused, searching for the right word. ready for adventure. Her laugh was warm and genuine. After everything we've been through, a Sunday ride hardly qualifies as an adventure. But thank you. Old Parker appeared at the door, eyeing Finn with a knowing look that made the younger man fight a blush. "Have her home by supper," he said, though his tone held no real admonishment. "And mind you stay on the main trails. Town's still jumpy after what happened." "Yes, sir," Finn assured him, helping Willa mount the gentle mare he'd brought for her, a significant upgrade from the Rustlers' half-wild bronco she'd ridden on their return journey. They rode at a leisurely pace, following the river for several miles before turning toward the rising slopes of Grand Mesa. Spring was in full bloom, wildflowers dotting the meadows and new leaves brightening the aspen groves. Willa rode with confidence, and Finn found himself watching her more often than the trail, admiring the way sunlight caught in her hair and the easy grace of her posture in the saddle. "You're staring," she observed without looking at him, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Just making sure you're comfortable," he replied, not entirely dishonestly. "That saddle's new. It's perfect," she assured him. "Much better than riding bound to a saddle horn with rope." The casual reference to her captivity startled Finn. "Willa, you don't have to make light of what happened." She turned to look at him then, her expression serious. "I'm not making light of it, but I won't let it haunt me either. It happened, I survived, and now I get to decide what it means for the rest of my life." Her resilience humbled him. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said simply. A blush colored her cheeks at his praise. "Not so strong," she demurred. "I still wake up sometimes thinking I'm back there, bound and helpless." "That doesn't make you weak," Finn insisted. "Just human." They continued riding, the conversation turning to lighter topics as they ascended toward the viewpoint Finn had promised. When they finally reached it, Willa gasped at the panorama spread before them, the river valley below, Delta a small cluster of buildings in the distance, and mountains rising on the horizon, their peaks still crowned with snow. "It's magnificent," she breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the overlook. Finn joined her, leaving the horses ground tied nearby. "I come here sometimes when the ranch feels too confining or town gets too noisy. Helps put things in perspective." Willa nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "It makes our troubles seem small, doesn't it, all that vastness?" "Not small," Finn corrected gently. "Just part of something larger, like we are." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, as though seeing past the quiet rancher to the man beneath. "When did you get so philosophical, Finn Donovan?" he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Spend enough time alone with your thoughts, you either go mad or start making sense of things." "And which happened to you?" she teased. "Jury's still out on that," he replied with a wry smile. They laughed together, the sound natural and right against the backdrop of wilderness. When the moment passed, Finn remembered his promise. "I brought something for you," he said, returning to his saddlebag and retrieving a small revolver. "It was my mother's. Not much for stopping a grizzly, but good for protection if you're ever in a tight spot." Willa accepted the weapon carefully, respecting its deadly potential. "It's beautiful," she said, noting the pearl grips and the fine scrollwork on the barrel. "Pa gave it to her when they first came west," Finn explained. "Said a woman alone needed more than just her wits for protection sometimes. She taught me to shoot with it when I was just a boy." "And now you'll teach me," Willa said, her tone making it half question, half statement. For the next hour, Finn instructed her in the basics of handling the revolver, how to load it, how to hold it properly, how to aim and account for its kick. Willa proved an apt pupil, listening intently and practicing each movement until it became fluid. When it came time for her to fire, Finn set up empty cans on a fallen log about 20 paces away. He stood behind her, adjusting her stance with gentle touches that sent awareness skittering along his nerves. "Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger," he instructed, his voice close to her ear. "Don't pull it, just apply steady pressure." Willa nodded, focused on her target. The revolver cracked, the bullet going wide but not by much. She tried again and this time clipped the edge of one can, sending it spinning. "I hit it," she exclaimed, turning to Finn with such delight that he couldn't help but smile in return. "You're a natural," he told her, meaning it. "Few more sessions, and you'll be outshooting half the men in Delta." They continued practicing until Willa had emptied the revolver several times, her accuracy improving with each round. By the time they stopped, she had managed to hit more targets than she missed, and her confidence had grown visibly. "Thank you," she said as Finn showed her how to clean the weapon properly before returning it to its holster. "Not just for the lessons, but for treating me like I'm capable." "You are capable," Finn replied. "Anyone who doesn't see that isn't looking properly." They shared a simple meal. Finn had packed cold chicken, biscuits, and early strawberries sitting side by side on a blanket spread over the spring grass. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences that required no filling. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly packed up and began the ride back to town. Neither spoke much on the return journey, each lost in thoughts about what the day had meant and what might come next. At the Parker home, Finn helped Willa dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Old Parker watched from the porch, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for today," Willa said, not immediately stepping away from Finn's proximity. "For everything." "My pleasure," Finn replied, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing and how her eyes seemed to reflect the golden late afternoon light. "Perhaps we could do it again next Sunday. Continue your lessons." "I'd like that," she agreed, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "Very much." With a final smile, she turned and walked toward the house, pausing at the steps to look back once before disappearing inside with her father. Finn stood for a moment longer, watching the closed door, a strange mixture of contentment and anticipation settling in his chest. Then he mounted his horse and headed back to his ranch, already counting the days until next Sunday. The weeks that followed established a new pattern in Finn's life. Sundays were devoted to Willa riding, shooting practice, and increasingly, conversations that ranged from the practical to the profound. He learned that beneath her proper shopkeeper's daughter exterior lay a quick wit and insightful mind that challenged and intrigued him at every turn. For her part, Willa seemed to blossom under his attention, regaining confidence and finding new strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Her skill with the revolver improved rapidly, and soon she was hitting targets at distances that impressed even Finn. "You're getting better than me," he told her one afternoon as she successfully shot a pine cone from a branch 50 yards distant. "Hardly," she replied, though pride shone in her eyes. "But I'll never be helpless again." The town noticed their growing attachment, of course. Delta was too small for any relationship to develop unobserved, and the circumstances of their initial connection had already made them subjects of local interest. But if Finn and Willa were aware of the speculation and occasional gossip, they gave no sign of it. Old Parker, for his part, seemed content with the situation. His health had improved enough for him to resume some duties at the store, though he tired easily and relied heavily on Willa's assistance. Whenever Finn visited, the old man would find reasons to step outside or retreat to the storeroom, giving them moments of privacy that didn't go unappreciated. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it the annual 4th of July celebration in Delta. The town transformed for the occasion, with bunting and flags decorating Main Street and preparations underway for dancing, contests, and a community picnic. "You'll come, won't you?" Willa asked Finn during their Sunday outing the weekend before. "Pa says the store's supplying prizes for the shooting contest. You could enter." "And compete against my own student," Finn teased. "Seems unfair." Willa laughed, the sound freer and lighter than it had been in the early days after her rescue. "I'm not entering the contest. But I might make a private wager with you about who can hit more targets." "What stakes did you have in mind?" Finn asked, intrigued by the mischievous glint in her eye. Willa considered for a moment. "If I win, you have to take me to see that waterfall you mentioned, the one on the far side of the mesa that's so hard to reach." "And if I win?" Finn prompted. A blush colored her cheeks. "What would you want?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities. Finn studied her face, noting the mixture of boldness and uncertainty in her expression. Over the past months, they had grown increasingly comfortable with each other, their friendship deepening into something neither had put a name to yet. But they had maintained the proprieties expected of them, their physical contact limited to the necessary touches of shooting lessons and the occasional assistance mounting or dismounting a horse. "If I win," Finn said finally, his voice low, "I'd like permission to call on you formally." "With your father's blessing." Willa's eyes widened slightly, and for a terrifying moment, Finn feared he'd misread the situation entirely. Then a smile bloomed across her face, transforming her features with a radiance that took his breath away. "You don't need to win a bet for that," she said softly. Finn felt something expand in his chest, a hope he'd been nurturing but afraid to acknowledge fully. "No," she shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "No, I think Pa's been expecting it for weeks now." "And you?" Finn asked, needing to hear her say it. "What have you been expecting?" "Hoping for," she corrected gently. "Not expecting. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure if you saw me as someone to protect or someone to love," Finn finished for her when she trailed off. The word hung between them, spoken aloud for the first time. Willa nodded, vulnerability plain in her expression. Finn took a deep breath, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. "Willa, when I found you in that canyon, watching you face down Blackburn despite everything you'd been through, I knew I wasn't just rescuing my neighbor's daughter anymore. I was fighting for the woman I wanted in my life, not to protect, but to stand beside." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile remained steady. "Then I think you should speak to Pa as soon as possible. He's not a patient man, you know." Finn laughed, relief and joy coursing through him. "First thing tomorrow," he promised. True to his word, Finn rode into Delta the following morning, his best shirt pressed, and his normally unruly hair slicked down with water. He'd rehearsed his speech to Willa Parker multiple times on the ride in, but when he actually stood in the store facing the old man, the carefully prepared words fled. "Mr. Parker," he began, clearing his throat nervously, "I've come to ask your permission to court your daughter." "Properly, I mean." The older man regarded him steadily for a long moment, his weathered face giving away nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Took you long enough," he said gruffly. "Been watching you moon over each other for months now." Finn blinked, caught off guard by the response. Then, "You approve, sir." "Approve," Parker repeated. "Boy, you tracked down my daughter across half of Colorado and brought her back safely when no one else could. You think I'd trust her happiness to anyone else after that?" Relief flooded through Finn. "Thank you, sir." "I promise I'll save your promises for Willa," Parker interrupted, though his tone remained kind. "She's the one you need to convince, not me. Though from the look on her face this morning, I'd say you're already halfway there." As if summoned by her father's words, Willa emerged from the storeroom, stopping short when she saw Finn. Her cheeks flushed prettily, and she glanced between the two men with a questioning look. "Mr. Donovan here has something to ask you," her father said, making a show of checking his pocket watch. "And I suddenly remember I'm late for a meeting with Reverend Stevens. I'll leave you two to talk." With that, the old shopkeeper grabbed his hat and departed, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind him. Alone in the store, Finn and Willa regarded each other silently for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. "Well?" Willa prompted, her eyes dancing with suppressed laughter. "What did you want to ask me?" Finn closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Willa Parker, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you?" "Properly, with your father's blessing, which I have, and with the intention of if you'll have me making you my wife someday." The words came out in a rush, not at all as he'd practiced, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. Willa's smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, the future stretching before them bright with promise. Then, mindful of the store window and the curious eyes of Delta's residents, Finn reluctantly stepped back, though he kept hold of one of her hands. "May I escort you to the 4th of July celebration?" he asked. "As my sweetheart officially." "I would be honored," Willa replied, squeezing his hand. "Though you should know that half the town will be watching our every move." "Let them watch," Finn said, surprising himself with his boldness. "I'm proud to be seen with you, Willa Parker." The 4th of July celebration exceeded all expectations. Delta put on its finest display, with every building decorated in red, white, and blue, tables laden with food from every household, and festivities that lasted from morning until well after dark. Finn arrived at the Parker home promptly at 9, dressed in his Sunday best, to escort Willa and her father to the town square. Willa wore a blue dress that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, her hair arranged in an elegant style that framed her face beautifully. "You look stunning," Finn told her, offering his arm. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Donovan," she replied with a teasing smile, taking his arm with a confidence that made his heart swell. Throughout the day, they participated in the community celebrations, cheering at the children's sack races, applauding the town band's patriotic selections, and joining in the communal feast at midday. Everywhere they went, townsfolk offered congratulations and knowing smiles, confirming that their courtship was indeed the subject of much approving discussion. The shooting contest drew a large crowd in the afternoon. True to her word, Willa didn't compete, but she watched proudly as Finn took second place, bested only by the town's aging sheriff who had been a sharpshooter in his younger days. "You let him win," Willa accused good-naturedly as Finn rejoined her after accepting his prize, a fine leather belt from the Parker store's stock. "Never," Finn protested with a laugh. "Sheriff Martin earned that win fair and square, but I appreciate your faith in my abilities." As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the square, and the band struck up tunes for dancing. Couples of all ages took to the makeshift dance floor, from young sweethearts to long married pairs who moved together with the ease of decades of partnership. "May I have this dance?" Finn asked formally, extending his hand to Willa. "I thought you didn't dance," she replied, remembering his comment from weeks earlier that he avoided town dances whenever possible. "For you, I'll make an exception," he said, leading her toward the dancing couples. Finn wasn't the most graceful dancer, but what he lacked in skill he made up for in enthusiasm. Willa followed his lead easily, laughing when he occasionally missed a step, but never making him feel self-conscious about it. As the evening wore on, the band shifted to slower tunes, and couples drew closer together. With Willa in his arms, moving in time to the music under the stars and lantern light, Finn felt a contentment he'd never known before. "What are you thinking?" Willa asked, looking up at him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado," he answered honestly, "and that I never want this night to end." Something softened in her expression. "It doesn't have to," she said quietly. "Not really. This is just the beginning, Finn." In that moment, with the music playing and the community that had survived so much celebrating around them, Finn believed her completely. This was indeed just the beginning of their story together. The courtship of Finn Donovan and Willa Parker became the talk of Delta over the summer and into the fall of 1879. They were seen together at church each Sunday, riding out afterward for their now traditional outings. Finn became a regular fixture at the Parker home for supper, and Willa occasionally visited his ranch, always properly chaperoned by her father or Hector's wife. By the time the aspen leaves turned gold against the mountainsides, no one in town had any doubt where their relationship was heading. The only question was when, not if Finn would propose. For his part, Finn was planning carefully. He'd saved diligently over the years, and now those savings had a clear purpose: expanding his modest ranch house into a proper home for a family, buying a ring worthy of Willa, and securing their future together. He worked extra hours, took on additional cattle from neighboring ranchers to increase his herd, and put every spare penny aside. Willa, meanwhile, had taken on more responsibility at the store as her father's health fluctuated. She'd also become something of a role model for other young women in Delta, her story of survival and her subsequent determination to learn self-defense, inspiring others to follow suit. She started informal shooting lessons for interested women, with Finn occasionally assisting. "You're changing the way people think," Finn told her proudly after one such session where 5 women had practiced with borrowed revolvers behind the Parker store. "I'm just helping them feel safer," Willa demurred. "The world is dangerous enough without being helpless." "Still," Finn insisted, "you're making a difference. They respect you, not just for what happened, but for how you've carried on afterward." Willa's expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I think about the other women who weren't as fortunate as I was, who didn't have someone tracking them across the wilderness to bring them home. What happened to them?" It was a sobering thought, and one that had occurred to Finn as well during their ordeal. "We can't save everyone," he said gently. "But what you're doing now, teaching others to protect themselves, showing them strength, that matters." As winter approached, Finn's plans for their future took more concrete shape. The addition to his ranch house was completed just before the first heavy snow: a larger kitchen, a proper parlor, and 2 additional bedrooms. He ordered a ring from Denver, a modest but beautiful gold band set with a small diamond that arrived by stagecoach in early December. Now he just needed the perfect moment to propose. The opportunity presented itself during Delta's Christmas celebration. The town gathered at the church on Christmas Eve for services, followed by a community supper in the meeting hall. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated the simple space, and candles cast a warm glow over the festivities. Willa looked particularly lovely that evening in a deep green dress, a contrast to her auburn hair, which she wore partially up, with soft curls framing her face. She moved among the townsfolk with easy grace, helping serve the meal and ensuring everyone's cups remained filled. Finn watched her from across the room, the small box containing the ring heavy in his pocket. He'd spoken to William Parker the previous day, receiving not only his blessing but also a gruff hug that had surprised them both. "You planning to stare at my daughter all evening, or are you going to join the celebration?" The voice of Sheriff Martin broke into Finn's thoughts. Finn smiled sheepishly. "Just waiting for the right moment, Sheriff." The older man clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, I've been married 40 years, and I can tell you there's no such thing as the perfect moment. There's just the moment you choose to take." With those words of wisdom ringing in his ears, Finn made his decision. After the meal, when the townsfolk had begun to disperse into smaller groups for conversation and music, he approached Willa, who was arranging leftover food for families to take home. "Could I steal you away for a few minutes?" he asked quietly. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity sparked in her eyes. "Of course. Let me just finish here." Once she'd completed her task, Finn led her outside. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in the crisp December air. Their breath formed small clouds as they walked, Willa's arm tucked through his. "Where are we going?" she asked as he guided her away from the church toward the town square. "You'll see," Finn replied, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she must hear it. In the center of the square stood the town's Christmas tree, a tall spruce, decorated with handmade ornaments, paper chains, and tiny candles in protective glass holders that cast a magical light through its branches. During the day, it was a gathering place for the community, but now in the late evening they had it to themselves. "It's beautiful at night," Willa said, looking up at the tree with childlike wonder. "So peaceful." "Do you remember the first time we spoke?" Finn asked, turning to face her. "Really spoke, I mean, not just passing greetings in town." Willa smiled at the memory. "At the Founders' Day picnic 3 years ago, I was helping serve pie and you came back for seconds. You said my apple pie was the best you'd ever tasted. And you said it was your mother's recipe, and that sharing it with others helped keep her memory alive," Finn recalled. "That's when I knew you were special, Willa Parker. Not just pretty, but deep, someone who understood that the most important things in life aren't things at all, but connections to people we love." Willa's eyes widened as Finn took both her hands in his. "I didn't know then that you would become the most important connection in my life," he continued, his voice steady despite his nerves. "But I know it now. When I thought I might lose you, when I tracked you across the wilderness, I realized that my life without you in it would be empty, no matter how much land or cattle or money I might have." Tears began to glisten in Willa's eyes as Finn released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, producing the small velvet box. "Willa Parker," he said, dropping to one knee in the snow before her. "You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box, revealing the ring nestled inside, small but perfect, just like their love that had grown from adversity into something precious and enduring. "Yes," Willa whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Finn Donovan, I will marry you." With hands that trembled slightly from cold and emotion, Finn slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he rose and, mindful that they were technically in public view, though no one else was braving the cold, he kissed her gently, their first kiss, sweet and brief but full of promise. Willa looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at Finn, her smile radiant even through her tears. "It's beautiful," she said. "Perfect." "Like you," Finn replied, unable to contain his joy. "Though your father will be wondering where we've gone, shall we go tell him the news?" "He already knows you were planning to ask," Willa reminded him, tucking her arm through his again as they began walking back toward the church. "But yes, let's go make it official." They returned to find the celebration winding down, though plenty of townsfolk remained, enjoying the company and warmth on the cold winter night. William Parker sat near the fire, deep in conversation with Reverend Stevens, but he looked up as they entered, his keen eyes immediately noting their clasped hands and the new addition to his daughter's finger. Rising to his feet with surprising agility for a man his age, Parker crossed to them, his face breaking into a broad smile that erased years from his weathered features. "I take it she said yes," he asked Finn, though the answer was plain on both their faces. "She did, sir," Finn confirmed, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Parker embraced his daughter, then surprised Finn with another of those gruff hugs. "Welcome to the family, son," he said. "Officially now." Word spread quickly through the gathering, and soon the couple was surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and asking about wedding plans. Reverend Stevens beamed at them, already mentally checking his calendar for suitable dates. "We're thinking spring," Willa told Mrs. Jenkins, the seamstress who was already offering to help with a wedding dress. "After the worst of the mud season, but before it gets too hot." "April, perhaps," Finn added, marveling at how naturally they fell into planning their shared future. "Once the passes are clear, so Willa's cousins from Denver can attend." The celebration took on a new dimension with the announcement, becoming an impromptu engagement party that lasted well into the night. When they finally departed, Finn escorting Willa and her father home through the snow-covered streets, there was a sense of rightness, of completion, that neither had quite expected. At the Parkers' front porch, William tactfully went inside first, leaving the engaged couple a moment of privacy to say goodnight. "Are you happy?" Finn asked, still somewhat in awe that this remarkable woman had agreed to share her life with him. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Willa answered, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Especially after everything." Finn understood her meaning. The shadow of her ordeal would always be part of their story, but it was just that a part, not the whole. "We'll make new memories," he promised. "A lifetime of them." "I'd like that," Willa said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him briefly before disappearing inside with a final smile that warmed him all the way back to his ranch, despite the bitter cold. The months between Christmas and their April wedding passed in a flurry of preparations and planning. Willa, with help from the women of Delta, created a simple but elegant wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Denver. Finn added finishing touches to the ranch house, ensuring it would be ready to welcome his bride. William Parker, despite occasional health setbacks, threw himself into the preparations with surprising vigor, determined to see his only daughter wed properly. As the appointed day drew near, the entire town seemed invested in the celebration. After all, this wasn't just any wedding, it was the culmination of a story that had captivated their community. A tale of courage, perseverance, and love triumphant over adversity. April 18, 1880, dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the mountains stood crisp against a perfect blue sky as Delta's residents gathered at the white-steepled church. Finn stood at the altar beside Reverend Stevens, Hector serving as his best man, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady as he waited for his bride to appear. When the church doors finally opened and Willa entered on her father's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation swept through the congregation. She was radiant in a gown of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, her auburn hair adorned with a crown of spring blossoms. But it was her smile, directed solely at Finn, that took his breath away, a smile that contained all the promise of their shared future. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur for both of them, the familiar words spoken, vows exchanged, rings placed on fingers with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. And then, Reverend Stevens was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Finn was kissing his bride to the cheers and applause of everyone they knew. "Mrs. Donovan," Finn whispered as they turned to face their friends and family for the first time as a married couple. "I like the sound of that," Willa replied, squeezing his hand. The celebration that followed at the town hall was the most joyous Delta had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household. Music played continuously, and dancing continued well into the evening. Willa Parker gave a heartfelt speech that brought tears to many eyes, thanking Finn once again for bringing his daughter home and entrusting her future happiness to his care. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart, the entire town escorted them to the edge of Delta, where a buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers waited to take them to Finn's, now their ranch. As they drove away amid a shower of rice and good wishes, Willa leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment radiating from her. "Happy?" Finn asked, an echo of his question on the night of their engagement. "Beyond words," she replied, "though I think Ghost might be even happier than we are." She nodded toward the ranch road ahead, where the gray and white dog was already waiting, tail wagging furiously at the sight of the approaching buggy. Finn laughed. "He's been moping around the ranch for days, wondering why I wasn't bringing you home yet." "Well, I'm home now," Willa said, the simple statement carrying a depth of meaning that made Finn's heart swell with gratitude and love. Later that night, after Ghost had been properly greeted and the horses settled, Finn carried his bride across the threshold of their home. The ranch house, once a bachelor's practical shelter, had been transformed with Willa's input over the preceding month's curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, small touches that made the space theirs rather than just his. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donovan," Finn said, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Willa reached up to touch his face, her eyes full of a love that humbled him. "Our home," she corrected softly. "Our beginning." As he bent to kiss her, Finn reflected that their beginning had actually started in the most unlikely of circumstances, a kidnapping, a desperate pursuit across wilderness, a confrontation with danger that could have ended very differently. But perhaps that was fitting. Their love had been forged in adversity, tested by fire, and emerged stronger for the trials it had endured. Now, with the woman he loved in his arms and their future stretching before them full of possibility, Finn Donovan knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his life ensuring Willa never regretted choosing him, never doubted the depths of his devotion, and never again faced danger without him by her side. The years that followed brought changes to Delta and to the Donovans. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers to the valley. The Parker General Store thrived under William's continued guidance, with help from a young clerk he hired, when Willa's duties at the ranch prevented her regular assistance. Finn's cattle operation grew steadily, allowing him to purchase additional land adjoining his original property. With Willa's keen business sense complementing his ranching knowledge, they built a respected name in Colorado's cattle industry. The Donovan brand became known for quality stock and fair dealing. Their family grew as well. In the spring of 1882, Willa gave birth to a son they named James William, after both their fathers. The boy had Finn's dark hair but Willa's expressive hazel eyes and determined temperament. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Sarah Elizabeth, a calm baby with auburn curls who would grow to have her father's steady patience and her mother's quick mind through it all. The bond between Finn and Willa only strengthened. The shared challenges of building a ranch, raising children, and weathering the inevitable hardships of frontier life. Drought years, harsh winters, occasional illness all served to deepen their partnership. They never forgot what had brought them together. Each year on the anniversary of Willa's rescue, they would ride together to a quiet spot overlooking the valley, just the two of them, to acknowledge how close they had come to losing each other before they'd truly found one another. It was a private ritual that served to remind them of life's fragility and the precious gift of their time together. Willa continued teaching other women to shoot, a practice that gradually became less controversial as the years passed, and the value of self-reliance on the frontier became increasingly apparent. She also took great satisfaction in teaching her own children, both son and daughter, to handle firearms responsibly from an early age. "Some might say it's not ladylike," she told 8-year-old Sarah as they practiced with targets behind the ranch house. "But being safe is more important than other people's ideas of what's proper." "Besides," Finn added, watching proudly as his daughter hit the center of her target, "your mother's the most ladylike woman I know, and she can outshoot most men in the county." William Parker lived to see both his grandchildren reach school age, delighting in their visits to town and spoiling them shamelessly at the store. When he passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1889, the entire community mourned alongside the Donovans. The general store, now a Delta institution, passed to Willa, who decided to sell it to the young clerk who had managed it so capably in recent years. "Pa would approve," she told Finn as they signed the papers transferring ownership. "Mr. Collins reminds me of him, honest, hardworking, and fair with everyone who comes through that door." By 1890, as Colorado celebrated 14 years of statehood, the frontier was changing. The wild, untamed west of Finn and Willa's youth was gradually giving way to a more settled, civilized territory. Delta had grown into a proper town with a school, a bank, and even electric lights in some buildings. On a warm evening that summer, Finn and Willa sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play with Ghost's latest descendants, the old dog himself, having peacefully departed years earlier, though his loyalty lived on in the line of shepherds that continued to guard the Donovan ranch. "Do you ever miss it?" Willa asked, her hand finding Finn's in a gesture that had become second nature over their decade of marriage. "Miss what?" Finn asked, though he suspected he knew what she meant. "The wilderness. The way it was when you tracked Blackburn's gang." Before there were telegraph lines stretching across every valley and railroad tracks cutting through the mountains, Finn considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There was a freedom then, a sense that anything was possible if you were brave enough or determined enough. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for all the wilderness in Colorado." Willa smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Nor would I. Though I do worry sometimes that James and Sarah will never know that feeling of being truly on their own in the wild, relying on nothing but their wits and skills." "They'll find their own frontiers," Finn assured her. "Different from ours, perhaps, but no less challenging or rewarding." As if to underscore his point, 11-year-old James let out a whoop of triumph as he successfully lassoed a practice post, a skill he'd been working on for weeks. 8-year-old Sarah applauded her brother's success, then demonstrated her own prowess by tossing a smaller rope with surprising accuracy for a child her age. "They have your spirit," Finn observed, pride evident in his voice. "And your steadiness," Willa countered. "A good combination, I think." They fell silent, content to watch their children play in the fading light of day, the legacy of their love visible in the next generation's strength and joy. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Finn and Willa stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the vast Colorado sky ablaze with stars. The ranch was peaceful, the only sounds the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pastures and the soft whickering of horses in the stable. "We've come a long way from that canyon where I found you," Finn murmured, his arms encircling Willa from behind. She leaned back against him, secure in the embrace that had been her sanctuary for more than a decade. "Sometimes it seems like another lifetime," she admitted, "or like it happened to someone else entirely. Then I'll catch a glimpse of the scar." Her hand moved unconsciously to her collarbone, where a faint white line remained from Blackburn's knife. "And you remember," Finn finished for her, knowing well how moments from their ordeal could suddenly surface, even after all these years. Willa turned in his arms to face him. "I remember everything," she said. "The fear, yes, but also the moment I realized someone had come for me, that I wasn't forgotten or abandoned. That moment, Finn Donovan, was when I started falling in love with you, though I didn't know it then." Finn touched her face gently, still amazed after all their years together that this remarkable woman had chosen him, had built a life and a family with him. "I think I was already half in love with you before then," he confessed, "just too stubborn or blind to admit it." "Well," Willa smiled, rising on tiptoe to kiss him with a tenderness that still held the passion of their early days, "we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As they stood together in the quiet of their home, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy, both knew with absolute certainty that while their beginning might have been extraordinary, it was the ordinary days that followed filled with love, family, and purpose that constituted their greatest adventure of all.